If you follow me over on Instagram or possibly over on TikTok, you may have seen this painting before. Possibly even 4 years ago, which is when I painted it for the first time. And you might be asking, why am I repainting it now? Well, there's a lot of answers to that, but it seems to be that every time I post this painting, it goes ridiculously viral on everything I post it on, so might as well try YouTube. That was partially a joke, also not really, but the biggest reason why I'm repainting it is because every time I look at it, I just see things that I wish that I had done better. I painted this when I was pretty new to painting, and now that I've had almost 4 years of experience, every time I see it, I'm just like, wow, I could do that way, way, way better. And since everyone that seems to follow me from this painting, I figured I should jump back in, try again, try and make this to the best of my abilities now, and maybe I'll keep doing that in the future. Every 4 or 5 years, I'll repaint it and just kind of like see how much better it comes out. More on that later, but this is also going to partially be a slightly educational video, or at least a breakdown of kind of what I'm doing, which I think a lot of people are probably interested in. So we're just going to talk about that now. I talk a lot about stretching your own canvases over on Instagram, but I think it's doubly important when you're working large, just for quality, and it's also really hard to find custom-sized canvases at this size that are well built. For this painting, I'm going to be using a linen canvas with an oil ground, and that's going to require a sizing layer in between just to protect the fibers of the canvas, or linen in this case, from basically being deteriorated over time by the oils. This was traditionally a rabbit skin glue, but over the past 15-20 years, most artists and archival people that take care of like making paintings last forever have kind of switched the narrative over to a PVA glue, which it reacts less to humidity, and that is even more important in countries like Japan and Indonesia, where humidity is huge, and there's also a massive growing art market. The biggest downside to PVA glue versus rabbit skin glue is that it won't tighten the canvas up as it dries. It actually tends to do the opposite and loosen it while it dries, so it's important that you put the PVA glue onto the canvas before you stretch it, which is what you saw me do there, or at least the first layer. At this point, I have my canvas fully stretched, and I'm going back in with another layer of PVA glue just because I wasn't super happy of the coverage of before, because I kind of had it like pretty watered down, so it absorbed into the canvas. Now it's time for my least favorite substance on earth, which is oil ground. For some reason, it just does not wash off your hands if you get it on it. Like, I can get oil paint off my hands pretty easily, but this stuff is impossible. With an oil ground, it also takes significantly longer for it to dry compared to an acrylic based, and that's pretty much just gonna make it so you need to wait at least 24 hours before doing a second coat, and then wait about a week in order to actually start painting on this. And that leads me to my first big mess up of this project. I was toning this canvas way too early, and you usually add Gamsol to that, and unfortunately that started to break down the ground because it hadn't dried fully. This ended up being more of a time suck than it did an actual problem, because this shouldn't really affect the structure of the painting, and I kind of use it as an opportunity to just build up some texture, and it almost made the canvas kind of look like it was stone. The problem was that I had to order new ground because I had run out, and then I had to wait a week on top of that in order for it to dry before I could actually put another toning layer on top of. I'm going to use this nice little opportunity to talk about why artists use a toning layer, because I think a lot of people are always confused as to why I am like spreading just a color across my white canvas in the beginning of most of my paintings. Say we have two canvases, one of them is toned and one of them is not, and we are, let's say, trying to paint this picture of my cat. And let's just say that we're trying to match the color underneath her chin. And I think a lot of people would be like, oh yeah, no, that's white. When in reality, both of these two colors are the same, and both of them are the same as underneath her chin. It really just makes it a little bit easier to match colors and makes you second guess yourself a little bit less. Now, the super secret, not so secret, very traditional use of using a tone is exactly what I'm doing right now. Is instead of using a pencil or charcoal or anything, I'm just kind of wiping away the ground. This is going to allow me to get a really fast underpainting, like really, really fast, without much work. When I first started painting, I used to spend hours and hours and hours either drawing or transferring or doing whatever method to get my drawing onto my canvas, and then I would spend the remainder of the painting covering that entire thing up. which in my opinion is a huge waste of time, and I am glad I saw the light at the end of the tunnel and started using oil paint to its fullest abilities. Those abilities being I could just cover up parts of the painting that aren't working and just repaint them and just keep doing that infinitely, and it ends up being a lot more fun. And it also ends up leaving little scars in areas on the final painting that show kind of like a struggle and the struggle of making it, which I think is much more interesting to look at than like a perfectly rendered painting. Now, after you wipe out all of your highlights, I think the most natural progression is to just go back in with your darks, and you end up with kind of just a 3-tone painting or a 3-tone sketch, and that's usually the best place where you can then start correcting your drawing before you invest too much time into something, and it becomes more and more of a hassle in order to fix, especially later on. I don't typically use any mediums. I'll typically just paint straight onto the tube, but for this, I'm going to be using I think it's cold wax medium, and I mixed a little bit of liquid into it to get it to dry a little bit faster, and I'm only going to be using this on the first layer just to build up some like body into the paint without wasting every ounce and every dollar I have. You want to be following a fat over lean rule, and a super, super easy, I don't really know what I'm talking about, breakdown of this is, I'm just going to write a little graph. Here you go. That's about it. That's all I know. Try and do your best. If you don't follow this, your painting is going to crack, but who fucking cares? We love a little bit of patina. Like, look at this old-ass Ames chair I found on Facebook Marketplace. Compared to this one. Look at that. Ugh. That was also a joke, but also kind of not really. Like, you should definitely follow the fat over lean rule to the best of your ability, but it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. Otherwise, sections of your painting can literally flake and chip off, which you don't want. The even more simplified version of that is don't put paint that is going to dry really, really fast over paint that is going to dry slow. Otherwise, the paint layer that is on top that dries faster is going to encapsulate the wet paint underneath, and then it will eventually fall off. Lean paint is paint that has medium in it that is going to make it dry faster. Neutral is basically just oil paint at its basic form, just going to dry how fast it typically does. Fat paint is just going to be anything that makes the paint dry slower, which is typically adding more oil to it. All right, I am at a point in the painting where it is time to correct my drawing and kind of start to refine everything, and the method I'm using here to check my drawing is that I just took a photo of where I was in the painting, and now I brought it over to Procreate on my iPad, and I'm just going back and forth between the reference photo and the painting that I have, and kind of just adjusting things as needed. And I'm going to be continuing to do this throughout the entire painting and doing the corrections with paint versus doing a underdrawing and sticking to it, just because I think it's more fun. Again, just way more fun to do it this way than it is to just play paint by number or charcoal by number, where you just take a photo, transfer it on, aka trace it on, and then fill in the blank, which is ultimately boring and really, 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 really boring. And did I say boring? Also, I'm not calling anyone out here. That's how I learned. It's how I was painting up until like 2 years ago. Really boring, tedious, no fun at all. I recommend skipping that step in the angsty teen to Instagram artist canon event pipeline. You know things are getting serious when I break out the fake knockoff Home Depot Ames chair and get closer to the painting. Damn, this is like my first time making like a 20-minute long like painting video on YouTube, and it is hard to fill 20 minutes with voiceover. So I'm going to go back to talking about why I am painting this again, because I'm quickly running down of things to say, and I seem to be getting more and more sarcastic as I do. So here's the original painting, and I think there's a lot of good things going for it, and I also think there's a lot of bad things going for it. The first being that I just used way too much black, and there's also a lot of lens distortion that I just like didn't even see and then like transferred onto the painting just hoping that it would go away, which it didn't. You can kind of see it in all the verticals like curving down, and also in the floor where things are like a bubble. Working from reference photos versus life is always like shooting yourself in the foot, even though sometimes it can't be avoided. It's just a giant hindrance at the end of the day, because you end up making a painting that looks like a photo versus a painting that looks like a painting. And one of the biggest things that photography does that your eye doesn't is that it it kind of just condenses colors. Like if you expose the lights versus exposing the darks, one or the other are going to be really, really either blown out or underexposed to where you just get a lot of dark or like a lot of like washed out highlights. And that's not really indicative of how you see things, and it also doesn't transfer well to paint. There's no way to really learn this other than to just paint from life a lot, and painting people from life sucks because you have to pay them or just spend all of your money and all of your future money on an art degree. So I recommend just painting a lot of still lifes with either shadow boxes or just setting up a direct light source and just painting from that. You kind of see how things work. You see how light shadows are typically. You see your highlights are almost never white, which reference photos always make them seem that way. And there's also no lens distortion. So all of your verticals are typically like actual verticals, and it's a very good reference point for drawing, is just like lining up your verticals with the side of your canvas. After you spend about 500 hours doing this, you're ready. You're finally ready to upgrade to the final boss, which is painting from reference photos and making them not look like reference photos. Now, if you would like to skip all of that, which I highly recommend not, there is some things you can do to kind of like alleviate some of that and like work from reference photos like right away without like learning what life looks like, even though I don't recommend it. So welcome to this section of the video, which I like to call Tom's Rules for Reference Photos. Number 1, always use your own reference photos. If you hop over to KanyeWest.com, grab the first picture of Kanye West and paint it, that is not your work. Like, I'm super glad that you turned yourself into a really slow printer and now you have a giant cutout of Taylor Swift on your wall, but that is going to look super tacky, and if it does happen to do really well on Instagram, you're going to have an audience full of people that really like Taylor Swift or Kanye and don't give a shit about you. Rule number 2, always use between 35 and 50 millimeters on your lens, just because that tends to be the sweet spot for looking the most like your eye or how your eye sees things, while also giving you the least amount of distortion. If you use a fisheye lens or some kind of zoom lens, you're going to compress the background or you're going to warp the edges, and it's going to look super unnatural, especially when you blow it up to a large canvas. Unless that's the effect that you're going for, which sometimes it is, it's going to highlight that you are working from a photo. And in my work and a lot of people's work and a lot of respected work, we are trying to avoid this while also taking advantage of the best of both worlds, photo and life. Rule number 3, when you're taking a reference photo of something, whether it be a person or a bottle of whiskey, try to take a photo of it overexposed and also underexposed, which is going to give you basically accurate shadows and accurate highlights. And then when you're using that reference photo to paint from and match colors from, make sure you're painting all of the highlights from the underexposed photo and then paint all of the shadows from the overexposed photo. And that's going to give you the best chance of getting accurate like values. And then you can just kind of like make up your colors, sort of. More on that later. Or I guess more on that now, because I don't have any more reference photo points. Or I guess I do, kind of, but also not. Not a point, but a small bulletin underneath colors. Another thing that photos are terrible at are picking up at like temperature shifts between highlights and shadows. Typically, whenever you have a warm highlight, you're going to have very cool shadows. Think of like Monet and like his very blue shadows. And also vice versa. Whenever you have very cool highlights, you're going to have very warm shadows. Now, it's not as simple as that, but it also kind of is. Paint from life and you'll see it. Lots of like little areas will reflect like warmer and cooler light within like the warmer or overarching like highlight area, especially like things that are like next to objects. Like say you have a hand that's highlight, that's cool, next to a really red mug. Your hand is going to be slightly warmer than the rest of the skin just based on being closer to the mug because it's going to reflect different light off of it. Now, if you're painting from a photo, you're going to get very little of that information through the photo. So you're going to have to paint from life again and learn how it works, and then you will be able to transcend time and just do it by making it up. So here's the original again, and I knew nothing about any of this, and the entire thing is warm, and it looks like I put a nasty green filter over the whole thing, when in reality, I didn't. Now, if you look at what I'm doing in the background over the past like 5-10 minutes of this video, I've been like deliberately like warming up the shadows and trying to cool down the highlights to just try and like emphasize that transition. This is actually where the majority of this refining stage has like started to come in. The more I layer this paint over like previous layers and warm things up and cool things down, the painting almost renders itself. And up until the very end, you can kind of just like decide how far you want to go with it and then choose the areas to spend detailing. Because I really haven't detailed anything. I've just been refining here and there, going back and forth, working on the whole painting at the same time, stepping back, being like, you know what, this needs to change, going in, changing it, being bold with a brushwork, and just like not getting like stuck up on small areas so the whole painting can kind of come together at the same time versus like detailing and painting like a single section and then moving on to the next section and then moving on to the next section, which is again how I used to paint. And I think it creates a very lackluster painting in the end. And the reason it's kind of lackluster is because you're going like section at a time and almost fully rendering it to where you don't really like see the whole painting until the very end. This makes it really difficult to have these like split-second reactions of like parts of the painting where you like heighten colors or exaggerate areas so they kind of like vibrate off different areas. If you spend all of your time like painting each section fully like and then moving on to the next one, you almost invest too much time into it and you have like too much emotional connection to that area because you've spent hours and hours and hours quote unquote perfecting it, but it can't be perfected without the frame of the rest of the painting. And you might end up in the end with a really nice looking painting, but you will end up with a painting that you could have gone further on, and like subtly that will just show through in the end. And I think that's what happened here. I have this painting that's good, and from an outside perspective you might think it's phenomenal, but I just see a painting that could have been a fantastic painting. And I think that's kind of a curse of being an artist, is that you always look at stuff and be like, oh, it's not that good. And I'm sure I'll feel the same thing about the one that I'm currently painting. But there's also like something exciting about that. Every painting that I make is just a little bit greater than the one that I made before. And that will go on for the rest of my life. And I think that if you are really satisfied with the work that you're doing, then that is more so a sign that you've stopped growing rather than a sign of you being good. So in a really weird, twisted way, I hope that I'm never satisfied with what I do. So I think that covers why I'm repainting this. So I'm going to pivot back to talking about what I'm actually doing. I was originally pretty satisfied with how they were looking, especially in the beginning, but the more I brought up the rest of the painting, the more like focus of the painting, the less and less I was satisfied with these, because at first they were fun loose, but then they became like an eyesore because they were almost too loose. Now, this is kind of a pretty difficult balance, is like how far up am I going to render them? Because I still don't want them to be like the subject of the painting. I do want them to be kind of in the background, blurry, loose brushwork, not super rendered in, spots coming in and out, not super sharp lines, but I still need to bring them up enough. And that can be a really difficult balance, and I think that's where overworking a painting can come in. I think I did a pretty good job here, like keeping it loose while also like maintaining some of the structure, where it was mostly just refining edges. Now let's add the bloody nose. Also, if you're in the comments asking what this painting means, I will never be answering that, because I learned how to paint so I didn't have to talk, which is kind of ironic because I just spent probably 3 hours making a voiceover. So I think the painting means what it means to you. It's no longer mine once it's finished. It's like whatever you think when you look at it. And that is the entire painting. The final dimensions came out to 50 inches by 75. And I will have prints of this available probably sometime around November. If you are interested in purchasing one or possibly the original painting, you can sign up to my email list to receive more information over on my website. Now, if you somehow found this on YouTube, go check out my Instagram. And if you are here from Instagram, please subscribe because I'm probably going to be making more videos like this soon. Thank you. Peace.